If you were to walk onto a modern industrial farm today, you would see a landscape that is technically dead. The soil is no longer a living ecosystem, but merely a sponge, a sterile medium designed to hold the roots of corn or soy upright, while they are force-fed a chemical slurry of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium derived from petroleum. This is not farming. It is hydroponics performed in dirt. But in the desperate, starving years of the early 1940s, when the supply lines of the world were severed by U-boats and blockades, a different technology was deployed. It was not a machine. It was not a chemical synthesized in a German laboratory. It was a biological engine, a plant so powerful in its ability to mine nutrients from the deep earth that it was known as living manure. It allowed a starving population to regenerate soil faster than nature intended, turning dust into food without a single drop of oil. Today, you will not find this plant in the catalogs of major agricultural suppliers. You will not find it recommended by university extension offices funded by agrochemical giants. It has been relegated to the fringe, labeled a weed, or dismissed as a relic of a primitive past. This is not an accident. The disappearance of Russian Comfrey, specifically the sterile Bocking 14 cultivar, from the toolkit of modern civilization, is not a failure of the plant. It is a requirement of the system. To understand why, you must understand the threat it poses. It does not threaten your health. It threatens the revenue model of the industries that sell you the solution to the soil degradation they caused. To understand the magnitude of this erasure, we must look back to a time before the Green Revolution enslaved the global food supply to the price of a barrel of oil. For thousands of years, civilizations understood that fertility was a cycle, not a product. But the specific genetic lineage of the plant we know as Comfrey represents a biological anomaly. It is a hybrid, a genetic accident that occurred when the rough, prickly Comfrey of the Caucasus Mountains met the common Comfrey of Europe. The result was a monster of vegetative growth, a plant that refused to set seed and instead poured all its energy into leaf production and root expansion. In the 1940s, as the British Isles faced the very real prospect of starvation, this plant was not seen as a weed. It was seen as a strategic asset. The logic was brutal and simple. The war had cut off the importation of animal feed and fertilizers. The soil was being exhausted by the desperate need for calories. Into this breach stepped a man named Lawrence D. Hills, who would later become the architect of the organic movement, but at the time was looking for a way to keep a nation alive. He realized that this specific hybrid of Comfrey could produce up to 100 tons of biomass per acre. This was not just vegetation. This was high-grade protein and minerals, pulled from 10 feet below the surface where the roots of wheat and potatoes could never reach. It was a biological pump, bringing the lost fertility of the subsoil up to the surface, making it available for food crops. It was the only reason many smallholders could continue to produce food when the chemical fertilizers ran out. The mechanics of this survival technology are what make it dangerous to the modern economic model. A standard crop of corn is a surface feeder. It depletes the top 6 inches of soil of every nutrient available, leaving behind a wasteland that must be replenished. Comfrey operates on a different geological timeline. Its roots are thick, fleshy drills that can penetrate heavy clay and compacted hardpan, driving 6, 8, sometimes 10 feet down into the bedrock. At these depths, the earth is rich in minerals that have leached down over centuries. Potassium, calcium, magnesium, iron. The plant dissolves these minerals and pumps them upward, storing them in its massive, broad leaves. When these leaves are cut and laid on the surface of the soil, they decompose rapidly, releasing that mined wealth back into the topsoil. It is a closed-loop system of fertility. In the context of the 1940s, this meant that a farmer did not need to buy fertilizer. He simply needed to harvest the living manure he grew in the corner of his field. This autonomy is the antithesis of the modern consumer model. If you can grow your own fertility, you cannot be sold a bag of ammonium nitrate. If you can heal your own soil, you cannot be sold the pesticides required to keep weak plants alive in dead dirt. The efficiency of this system was proven in the fires of war, but as the smoke cleared and the factories that made explosives were retooled to make synthetic nitrogen fertilizer, the narrative changed. The self-sufficiency of the Victory Garden was dismantled. The message shifted from grow your own to buy the best, and the plant that had saved them was quietly pushed into the shadows. We must look at the crisis proof. History is filled with moments where the supply chain snaps, and in those moments, the difference between life and death is often the ability to generate resources locally. During the Great Depression and the subsequent war years, the knowledge of bioaccumulators like Comfrey was common currency. It was not esoteric knowledge for hippies. It was practical knowledge for survival. Records from the Henry Doubleday Research Association document trials, where potatoes grown on land, fertilized only with wilted comfrey leaves, yielded crops equal to or greater than those grown with standard farmyard manure. But unlike manure, which requires livestock, feed, and management, comfrey required nothing. It was a perennial generator of value. In the post-war era, as the Iron Curtain fell and the West moved toward industrialization, this knowledge was actively suppressed in favor of the scientific approach. The scientific approach, of course, meant the purchase of inputs, but in the cracks of the system, in the rural hinterlands of the Soviet bloc, and in the gardens of stubborn traditionalists in the West, the plant remained. It remained because it worked. It remained because when the trucks stop running and the shelves go empty, you cannot eat a supply chain. You can only eat what your soil can produce, and soil cannot produce without nutrition. Comfrey was the insurance policy against the fragility of the industrial system. Let us look at the brutal numbers, because sentimentality has no place in survival. To replicate the potassium content of 1 acre of established Bocking 14 comfrey, you would need to purchase and transport tons of commercial potash. A single comfrey plant can be cut 4 to 5 times a season. In optimal conditions, it produces more biomass per acre than almost any other crop on Earth. We are talking about yields that rival sugarcane in the tropics, but this grows in the temperate, gray climates of the North. Analyze the NPK ratio. Dried comfrey leaves have a ratio of roughly 1.80.5.3. That potassium number is the key. Potassium is the driver of flower and fruit production. It is what makes a tomato red and a potato swell. To get that level of potassium from a bag, you pay a premium. To get it from comfrey, you pay nothing but the caloric energy required to swing a scythe. Furthermore, the protein content of the leaves is comparable to legumes. In a survival scenario, this is not just fertilizer, it is animal fodder. Pigs and poultry fed on comfrey produce meat and eggs with rich orange yolks, full of nutrients that are absent in grain-fed livestock. The industrial model relies on importing soy from deforested rainforests to feed animals in confinement. The biological model relies on a plant that grows in the ditch to feed animals in the backyard. The efficiency gap is astronomical. One system requires a global network of ships, trains, and chemical plants. The other requires a shovel. Science has eventually caught up to what the old farmers knew, even if the findings are rarely publicized in the main agricultural journals. Modern chromatography and tissue analysis confirm that comfrey is a dynamic accumulator par excellence. It does not just pull up macronutrients, it mines the trace elements: silica, allantoin, B12. Allantoin is particularly significant. It is a cell proliferant, a substance that stimulates the rapid division of cells. In medicine, it is used to heal wounds. In the soil, it appears to stimulate the microbial life that drives the decomposition process. When you apply Comfrey to soil, you are not just adding chemicals. You are adding the catalyst for life. You are feeding the bacteria and fungi that form the digestive system of the earth. This is the scientific seal that validates the folklore. The plant is a biological mechanism for accelerating the metabolic rate of the soil ecosystem. It turns a slow process of regeneration into a rapid one. Yet you will hear warnings. You will hear about pyrrolizidine alkaloids. You will hear that Comfrey is dangerous to the liver. And here lies the nuance of the suppression. It is true that certain wild varieties of Comfrey contain these alkaloids. But the Bocking 14 cultivar was bred specifically to be safe and sterile. The toxicity scare was a convenient narrative, a broad brush used to paint the entire genus as hazardous, effectively scaring a generation away from the most potent soil-building tool in existence. It is a classic tactic. Highlight a manageable risk to obscure a massive benefit. The economic suppression of this plant is not a conspiracy theory. It is a matter of market logic. The agrochemical industry is built on the concept of scarcity. Nitrogen is scarce in the soil, so you must buy it. Potassium is depleted, so you must replace it. If a farmer can plant a border of Comfrey around his field and generate his own nitrogen and potassium in perpetuity, he exits the market. He becomes a non-consumer. If this practice were adopted at scale, billions of dollars in fertilizer revenue would vanish. The Green Revolution was sold as the only way to feed the world, but it was actually a way to monetize the world's hunger. By replacing biological cycles with linear consumption, the industry ensured a permanent customer base. Comfrey represents a break in that chain. It represents a return to the circular economy of the pre-industrial age, but supercharged by the specific genetics of the Bocking 14 hybrid. It is a technology that was developed, proven, and then buried because it was too effective for the wrong people. It empowered the producer and disenfranchised the supplier. In the calculus of modern capitalism, that is a capital offense. This is not an isolated incident. It is a pattern. We see the same logic applied to hemp, to raw milk, to rainwater collection. Any technology or resource that allows an individual to disconnect from the centralized grid of consumption is viewed with suspicion and regulated into obscurity. The narrative is always one of safety. It is for your own protection, they say. Leave the chemistry to the professionals. But the professionals have given us dead zones in the ocean from fertilizer runoff, topsoil that blows away in the wind, and food that is devoid of nutrition. The pattern is clear. Dependency is profitable. Autonomy is dangerous. The erasure of Comfrey is just one chapter in a long book of stolen independence. They took the knowledge of the soil and replaced it with the instructions on a chemical label. They took the living manure and replaced it with the dead salts of the factory. But the earth is forcing a return. We are entering an era of consequences. The cheap oil that makes synthetic fertilizer possible is ending. The geopolitical stability that allows for the global transport of phosphates is fracturing. The soil, abused for 80 years, is failing to respond to chemical inputs. We are seeing the plateau of yields. In this context, the primitive technologies of the past become the futuristic technologies of survival. The farmer of the future will not be a chemist. He will be a biologist. He will need to understand how to cycle nutrients on his own land, because he will not be able to afford to import them. Russian Comfrey is waiting for this moment. It has sat in the corners of old gardens, in the hedgerows of forgotten farms, patiently mining the subsoil, waiting for the system above it to collapse. It is the ultimate hedge against inflation, against supply chain failure, against the madness of a system that treats the earth as a factory floor. It is a biological machine that works for free, and that is why it must return. The final consecration of this plant is not found in a laboratory report or a government grant. It is found in the dark, rich, crumbling soil found beneath its leaves. It is found in the resilience of a garden that stays green when the neighbor's chemically dependent plots turn brown. To plant Bocking 14 Comfrey today is an act of rebellion. It is a declaration that you do not trust the system to feed you. It is a statement that you understand the true source of wealth is not the number in a bank account, but the fertility of the land beneath your feet. The industries banned it by omission, by silence, by the subtle pressure of progress. But you can bring it back. You can reclaim the lost vault of nature's technology. You can turn the dead soil of the industrial age back into the living earth of the future. The question is not whether this technology works. The question is whether you are ready to take responsibility for your own survival. Ask yourself, why is a plant that heals the soil labeled toxic by the same agencies that certify glyphosate as safe for your children's cereal?